Hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you for showing up again after this longer break where, depending a bit where you're connected, it could have been your breakfast time, could have been your lunch hour, maybe you had a pretty good dinner or some family catching up time. But I'm actually more excited, not really about having had the break, but the fact that you're back here where we're finally going to talk about using GitHub Copilot, everything around it. We already set the scene before, but this time it's really about using the GitHub Copilot to help us writing code. As you can imagine, we always start with the same flow, right? Where the thing is, what am I going to learn about in the next, 45 minutes or so? We're going to start with the GitHub Copilot setting the scene on what can you help me with in really writing code. So I would describe it as reviewing some of the code development features. From there, we're going to use it to actually generate code in a lot of different but also identical ways than what I already explained in the explanation and the documentation features before. And again, we're going to use the code inline completions, directly updating the code files, but we're also talking about it, using it from that little chat suggestion on the outside of it. So with that, enough about introduction, and let's move on with the first piece, showing you what code development features are actually about. Now, thinking a little bit about the history, like, did we develop code before AI tools helping us? Obviously. But in the end, it's all about optimizing, accelerating our development work. Now, over the years, within at least the two environments that I know, Visual Studio and VS Code, we already had IntelliSense, or maybe rebranded later on to IntelliCode. What it was doing was actually already using some AI-influenced, AI-inspired features to help us producing a possible next keyword in your coding sequence. Now, I would like to describe GitHub Copilot code development features as IntelliCode on steroids. Why? Because it's so much better, it's so much faster, and it's just amazingly cool. So in short, it helps you with two different environments. Why? Because you already know we have code completion, what we described before as inline, and on the other side we have the chat window, looking at it a little bit more from a higher level perspective. I'll start with the code completion. So the idea there is that you have code line completion, and that's getting triggered in the way you are developing your application. You start writing code, you move from one line to the other, and it's providing suggestions. It's really looking at the code you already have, and next to that, it's also looking at the broader project scope, or what we would call the workspace, right? Your code completion can be a single line, it can be a multi-line suggestion, like the example I used before because it's just so easy and generic, like you're creating a new method, or maybe you're creating a constructor or something in like the .NET environment, and it's going to know almost, and that's the freaky part I would say, it's going to know almost what you're actually trying to write out. So if you even start with creating a class for like a student, it immediately fills up like a multi-lines where it's going to provide you the student ID. It's going to give you the student first name, last name, the class, and maybe the year, and anything else that should be relevant for that student class. Or in like a retail scenario, or actually one of the sample apps we have is more in like a bank accounting space where you're going to create a class where it's going to come up with the debit and credit, the account number, and anything else that you need as a finance organization to keep track of your customers' bank account statements. On the other side, we have the chat suggestions. So again, ultimately the outcome, or I would say the expectation, is the same. Help me with producing code. Again, the main difference is that with the chat, it's really in that separate chat view window, and it means that it's a little bit more chat completion, interactivity alike, where it's not updating code right away. Now, you're still, remember, in the driver's seat. You're responsible for accepting the code, maybe starting that conversational approach again, like, well, this is kind of okay, but it's not exactly what I was expecting, and try to approach it as natural as possible. Like if you don't like like in the example of a class, right? If you don't like student ID number, but you just like student number or student ID, you could just go back to chat and ask him like, oh, can you rename student ID number to student ID? And then it's going to update the code as well. Now remember, we briefly talked and already walked you through quite some demos where you got the code completion inline, you got the chat, and you're going to use all three of them together. So that's a bit on the introduction. GitHub Copilot, can you please help me generating code? Now from here, we're going to zoom in on the two different features, where the first one is that inline code completion. I got a basic screenshot here. I'm not going to spend too much time because you can imagine we got a demo coming up, but I want to spend like a minute maybe just talking you through making sure that you do understand the concept. So again, first of all, GitHub Copilot uses the context, where the context can be a single file, like in this case, some program CS file, or if you have multiple files already opened, like really almost analyzing information from the different tabs that you have open. Next to that, you can accept the suggestion, so it's going to provide you a little snippet, and every now and then, and that's something you have to, I would say, just accept that it could take a little bit of time. I'm not talking about minutes, it's typically just a couple of seconds, where you start typing, like in this case, there's like a double calculate something something, you enter, you return to move to the next line, and then you give it a couple of seconds, and depending on the outcome, depending on how the detection mechanism of Copilot is working, it's going to produce you a snippet of code. Where again, that snippet could be one single line, could be multiple lines, and you're just going to accept it, or you just escape out of it, and then it's not doing anything. And then you start typing your own snippet of code again, and from there it's going to try and help you again, suggesting a code completion. But you're in the driver's seat, you're in control. It's really up to you if you want to accept it or not. And then sometimes you could end up in a scenario where you have multiple suggestions. Like in this case, if you look at the screenshot, you got like 1/2. It means that there are two different options. The way it works is that, again, it's just having that back and forth conversation where it's up to you to accept solution 2, but maybe not solution 1. And again, if you don't like it, you go back, you add some of your own code snippets, and then from there you rely on the suggestions again. And you can always go back and forth. That's the main thing. Now from here, it's also, again, once more important to make sure that all the files that are open are actually the ones related to that project. Now this might not always make a lot of sense, but it happens every now and then that you start working on a project, you get interrupted out of like a Teams call maybe, or a meeting, or you just want to catch up with your colleagues in the office, and you show them like the next project you're working on. For some reason, after the break or after talking to your colleague, you want to go back to your original project that you were developing, but you forget to close the other one. And it might be a different language, which now it's confusing the GitHub Copilot. So I would say make sure that you're not expending too much on opening files that are not always relevant or related to the project you're in, because it might confuse the tooling a little bit. Next to that, you could also, again, use natural language. So you could start with // just typing in a comment like, can you help me creating a class or a method or a constructor or anything like that, where again, you are deciding on how to prompt it. The more accurate, the more specific information you provide in that command line, the more accurate the output, the completion will be as well. And again, if you don't need any of those files, just close them, and again, not making it harder than it should be. Now, in the end, it's all coming down to how do we get started? How does this all work? What we would officially describe as best practices. So in short, I would say provide the context using open files. Close anything that's not relevant to the project you're working on. You can provide some top-level comments, and you might start like from a high-level perspective and then gradually making it more specific. Use that natural language. Maybe try to come up with a logical naming convention. Provide meaningful names and provide the same description in your comments or the same naming in your comments than what you would use in the descriptions itself. You could use Copilot as a training tool, which means that now you could actually feed it with sample code. Still, as part of the comments, you could provide like, well, I found this little snippet of code maybe in a different project. Can you help me updating this to this specific project scope? And last, I would say just act as the normal senior developer that you are, or maybe that you try to become, and keep the quality bar high. What it means is that, again, you're responsible for the work. You could not go back to your DevOps team, your Scrum Master, or anything like that, telling like, well, the code is not working, but it's GitHub Copilot providing, so that's like the only thing we have. That's not really how it works. You're in control, you're the developer, and you're going to use GitHub Copilot as your assistant. Now, I'm enough talking about it because I actually want to show you even more how that works in a real-life environment. So this module was all about code completion, right? So again, a sequence of demos here where for the first one, we're going to start with actually creating a new little console app. It's just something really cool to show you how you could actually use the Copilot chat integration to give you that kickstart, like a starter project. Again, based on nothing more than a little bit of prompt engineering magic. You could start from a blank canvas, but I'm still inside my reference project that we used for previous demos. I'm going to open my chat completion. I'm going to start a new chat. And although I'm inside an already existing project, I could do something like add workspace, triggering a new workspace here, /new, which is the keyword to actually create a new project, and then describing what my project is about. So we could do something that sounds like a new console application. So it's not a web app, it's not Blazor, it's not doing anything else. We're going to provide a name. So this could be APL 2007 module 3, because that's the module we're presenting in. And then last, we're going to define some of the actual development language characteristics. So we could do, I'm going to move this a little bit, use C# language version 12 and .NET 8, and then only create the .cs file and the .cs project file, because that's like using a starter template, you could say. So I guess that's probably all we need. We could actually add some other parameters. Let me go back. And you don't have to do this in one single prompt, but why not? One of the things that every now and then I forget about, but we could add something like enable the implicit usings and allow nullable to make my class's definition a little bit more straightforward. So this is triggering the creation of a new workspace. So it already creates like a suggestion proposed directory structure. So we have the folder name, we got a program CS, the CS project file, and as expected, a little README file as well. Now up to this point, nothing actually happened. So I'm going to hit that create workspace button. And it's going to ask me like, where exactly do you want to create this project? So I'm just going to move it into my download section for now. And it starts creating the project. It starts creating the files. And it's asking me like, oh, everything's there. Do you want me to actually open the new workspace? Obviously, we're going to go for yes. I'm not going to, I'm going to save my old project. We're now inside. We have our project file nicely recognizing implicit usings, recognizing nullable, and highlighting .NET 8. I can move into my program. There's obviously not too much besides the starter console hello world. So from the instructions, I'm just going to grab a little snippet of code. And it already has our quarterly income report class. And as you can see, there's a little bit of additional documentation in there, some of the steps that we're going to use later on. Now, one of the really nice things about code completion is that you can actually provide your own explanation, not using the chat window on the side, not using the inline chat completion, but now doing nothing more than what you probably already did in the past, just adding a description like this is what I actually want to get out of it. So what it means is behind or after our main class here, I'm going to add another little component starting with a little bit of a description / public constructor that we're going to call sales data. And then from there, we're going to define what your class should look like. And interesting enough, even that part is already getting covered here. I'm just going to show you that you don't have to accept anything that it just suggests, although I think in this case, it's almost what I actually expected. So I'm going to include the following fields. And then from here, you just provide a listing, the date sold, the department name, I think would be interesting for our store report overview, the product ID, quantity of items sold. And then again, it's just trying to analyze what you're actually asking for and then asking like last here, total sales amount, which I think is not what we need because we're going to run that calculation, the summation later on. So I'm going to add a last one here, unit price. After my comment line, I'm adding one new blank line, and within a split second, it's nicely relying on the completion of my code here, suggesting me how to create that new constructor. Sales data is in there, and I didn't specify like the characteristics, but it recognizes date sold, department name, and it's identifying some with a string type, some with the integer type, and the double for the unit price. Now, nothing blocks you from obviously continuing making changes to it. So from here, you could obviously accept it. You could do something else. You could also go like, well, thanks for trying, but I can actually do this. I wouldn't say better on my own, but you could actually just go like, well, it was a good attempt, but I still gonna make my own changes into it. And that's again that suggestion approach, right? Where it's gonna try and help you. Again, that's what I personally like about a Copilot branding, that you're still in charge. You can decide if you're gonna accept the suggestions, the changes, accepting the fixes, or you could go like, well, that's interesting, but for now, I'm not gonna use it. Another idea we have here is, for example, integrating a method that allows us to generate test data. So we have our sales data structure. So we're going to add 2 new empty lines, and then from there adding another sort of explanation where now it's again adding some comment, adding a new line into it. And it provides me with a full testing data sequence. So what's important here, I started with using the traditional comment of a line like ///. But now if you do the same with /* and then obviously closing it at the end, another way to add comments, traditional comments into your code. Again, nothing new, nothing Copilot specific. It's how we added comments into our code for the last couple of years already, but it's even still recognizing what we actually want to get out of it. So now it's nicely returning an array of sales data. The method is generating like 1,000 records. That's what this little line of code here is doing. And then from there, again, I don't want to focus too much on the actual content of what the app is about, what the code scenario looks like. But in the end, we're nicely accepting it. Why? Because it looks pretty accurate, pretty complete in what we're actually asking for. Now, again, it doesn't stop us from making changes to the code. So, for example, we could change the date. So imagine in my 1,000 records, that's like create a 1,000 randomly generated sales data records, where now it's zooming in on the date. interesting enough here, it's not recognizing the date only as the constructor, which now means that this should probably be the date sold, because that's what we do have in our constructor. And then random next might be a little bit too random, where we could go for a fixed year. I'm doing 2023, but this could actually be like 2025 or any other. And then still relying on random next and picking up a value between 1 and 13, and then another 129. All looks pretty good. And that's the main thing again, where it's in the end still relying on providing suggestions. It's coming up with code ideas. It's coming up with, whoops, there's a little mistake here. Sometimes autocomplete is doing a bit more than what we're expecting. It's not random generator, but it's random next. There we go. And again, try to use it as that assistant. It's going to give you a pretty accurate suggestion, but you're still in the driver's seat, allowing you to accept the code, to maybe not accept the code. That's really up to you. Now, moving on in our example here, we're again still creating our quarterly sales report. So what we're going to do here is going back into a little snippet of our code, where all the way down here, we just have an easy example for now, public void quarterly sales report. So that's our method. And for now, it's only providing a console line. So we're going to update that in a few manual steps, and then again, integrating some code updates out of our GitHub Copilot assistance. So I'm injecting my sales data component here. And without doing anything, as you can see, just giving it a little bit of time, it's nicely adding a lot of the numerations that we would expect from like the quarterly sales report code generator. Next to that, it's also integrating a nice if then else loop. And again, I didn't specify anything of this. So it's just recognizing like, oh, you want a method allowing you to generate the quarterly sales report. And from there, if I scroll down a bit, since our sample app had a console write line, meaning like we're actually going to create this little report from within our console app, it's actually adding all the statistics based on the 4 quarters that we have. So another easy, I would say, nice example where it's actually doing a lot of the thinking work already for us without breaking the code, without needing to think and go back and forth across different files. And that's again what makes it pretty interesting to use. So I guess from here, it's pretty much what we wanted to show you as part of this first demo, using the chat completion to literally start writing code, updating code. That's the main part here. So that's it. Now you know how to generate code using the inline GitHub Copilot capabilities. But as you know, there's another option using the same purpose, but now driven from within the chat suggestions. And that's what this next topic is about. The philosophy, the mindset is exactly the same. In the end, we want to rely on GitHub Copilot to help us creating code. But this time, it's not really directly from within the files that we already have or that we want to create. We're going to use the chat view for that. So in short, how does it work? First of all, one of the easiest ones is actually helping you in not only thinking about an app, but actually giving you that scaffolding approach. So what you can do, and you can see it here in the screenshot, you're going to use add workspace. That's the highest level in your project. And you're going to add the /new, and you're just going to provide a description as natural language based as possible. What kind of application do I want? I want you to write me, in this case, a console application using C#.NET. What it's going to do is providing you, again, it's important, it's providing a suggestion. It's giving you the program CS file, it's giving you the project file, and it's also adding the README file. If you're happy with this baseline approach, you go like, create workspace, and that's pretty much all you need to get started. Now you might think about like, okay, what's the difference between, like in this example, since it's C#, what's the difference in creating a folder, going to the terminal, typing in .NET New with everything else that you want? I would say this just makes it a lot easier. Because now if you think again about, I'm a junior developer, or maybe I'm senior as a developer, but I'm junior in this new language, you might shift from Java or Python to, why not C#, where now you go like, well, I know how to write code, but not in this language. Maybe you never really used .NET New as the command line, which means that now, thanks to natural language, you go like, hey, my dear Copilot chat, can you help me creating a new console application in C#? And bam, in just a couple of seconds, everything will be there. On top of that, again, you can also use it to fix coding issues. You can use it to later on help you with creating unit tests. And that's actually one of the sessions we'll talk about in part 2 of the training. And then overall, and that's the last one we're going to come back on in part 2, it's suggesting improvements. You can use this while you're developing your applications, or why not already having an application up and running, where now you're going to rely on the accelerating your development cycle, right? Using GitHub Copilot for unit testing and for overall improvements. A lot of cool stuff here, but before I'm going to jump into a demo, I need to talk through a little bit more how the concept actually works. So the first I'm offering here is generating managing suggestions. Again, how does it work? You go into the chat view where you're just going to provide a snippet of code. You're going to generate code suggestions in that viewing window. And then from there, again, the chat option is providing a combination of the slash comments like /explain /doc that we used before. Well, now we're going to use a few other ones. As long as you're in that chat view interface, nothing's really going to happen. It's up to you if you like the suggestion. And you got a couple of comment buttons here. And again, yes, I'll show you in a demo. You can do like a copy where it's just going to grab the little snippet of code and you're going to copy paste it just like you would do before, going to the internet, finding a little snippet of code in the Learn documentation, maybe in some blog post that you liked. And from there, you're just going to reuse it and maybe making some changes. Now, again, remember the chat completion in the backend, it's relying on the large language model being trained on the public internet information. So all of that code might be close to what you actually need, but it doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate. So that's where you could copy the suggestion and then maybe making some changes before you're going to move it. Or another option is one that I actually like, is that move it inline. So it's almost the same as copy paste, but you're not really copy pasting. You're just going to grab, accept what's there and directly moving it into your code set. The other option is where you're going to, again, rely on the inline chat, where it's showing you that little pop-up window that you saw in all previous demos already. And you just go like, well, this literally looks like what I need. In this example here in the screenshot, it's a regex expression. I still think one of the harder things in my development journey so far. Where now you just go to the chat integration, you're going to type the description like, can you provide me a regex expression to do something like, in this case, it's validating, I think, the complexity, maybe creating a password or validating an email address in this case, where it comes up with a pretty encrypted description, if you ask me, and it looks pretty accurate. So if you go like, okay, this looks okay, you look at the prompt, I want to create a regex or regular expression, but I don't even think you need to provide the full description of that to validate email address. It's going to think about it for a few seconds. It's going to provide your suggestion, and it's up to you to accept it, discard it, and that's pretty much it. So again, all super intuitive. And instead of just talking about it, I'm going to show you how to do this. So for this next demo, we're still in our code completion, but like we did before, it's all from within the code file itself. Well, now for this next part of the demo, I'm going to show you a bit how it works using the chat window to actually help us with about the same task. Now, every now and then, I do get feedback like in live presentations, right, during training. Like you're just relying on a lot of code and you're not always validating it. So what it means here is that obviously we're somehow building that quarterly income report little console application. And I think every now and then, indeed, it's actually a pretty good remark to run my code. Not just validating, like, it's not because there's no error messages showing up, like not the red squiggly lines, right? That it means that your app is actually working. So the easiest to test here is running .NET Run, where at least I can see that there are no errors. So the build compile is fine, but it's not producing statistics. I'm not seeing my sales report. Now, why not? Because I actually forgot 2 steps where I need to specify, like, you need to create some output. So to show you how this works, and it's a little bit segue from the previous demo, remember at the start of that project, we had 2 command lines where I immediately jumped into creating a new constructor for the sales data, and we could now actually go back to this previous command line. So here it says call the generated sales data method, which means I go to that command line. I'm just going to add a new line behind it, like just using the enter key, and it's adding the required code after that. Same for the quarterly sales method. I'm just going to move to the next line, and it's completing report quarterly sales report. I'm going to save my changes, which means if I'm now running it, it's nicely presenting the numbers that I'm expecting. And obviously the numbers are randomly generated because that's what our method actually asked for a little bit more down here. And then using 1,000 randomly generated sales, we don't really have them. It's just showing you some sample data. And that's where the numbering, I would say down here, the outcome of running my little app is presenting results. So pretty good. Our business actually generated some sales, but the numbering, the formatting, I would say isn't maybe the best. And that's what we're going to fix in this next part of the demo. But thanks for the reminder that running .NET Run, in this case for our C# based application, is probably a good thing. And maybe I should try and remind myself to do that a little bit more. So with that, let's move on with some of the other examples where GitHub Copilot is again going to help us dramatically in writing code, cleaning up code, maybe rewriting code. So we have our sales data constructor here. And now I'm going to use my inline chat completion. So I'm going to do Control-I. And again, you already know from previous demos, when I'm calling Copilot, I need to provide a prompt. So it's a pretty long one here, so I just pasted it in. I need a public constructor product departments that contains static string array providing 8 clothing industry departments, and then just providing explanations like I would say you would ask your peer developer, your colleague, right? Create a separate string array defining 4 character abbreviations. Each abbreviation must be unique, and so on and so on. So from here, I just gonna kick it off, and about the same behavior as what you saw in previous demos to write explanations or documentation, it's providing a suggestion. So it's respecting this source control way of highlighting code changes, which in my case, based on that GitHub Copilot theme I'm using, it's showing me like some new green lines, which means, hey, I'm actually adding code. I'm not removing anything in the app you already have. So I think from here, it looks pretty close to what I expected. So I got my department names. A little bit further down, I have my department abbreviations, and that's exactly what I was asking for. So I'm going to go up in the chat window and accepting the code changes. Remember here, you could also do the /doc to actually write some documentation. Since we already showed you how to do that, I'm going to save you from that step in my demo step here. So next, we're in our product department, where we are now adding about the same, but using the manufacturing sites. So I could do something like making sure I'm outside of my product departments. There we go. Adding a new line, Control I to call that GitHub Copilot. And now I'm doing about the same. I need a public constructor manufacturing site containing a static string for 10 manufacturing sites, giving it some names, using 3-character codes, including the ISO country code. And we don't have to specify anything else what we mean by that. So as you could expect, it's providing that new constructor manufacturing sites, and it has a few different regions there. So again, I like it. I'm going to accept it. And then last, I'm going to make some final changes in my sales data structure. So I'm going to select my sales data, and just to make sure, I'm going to use the selection option. Once more doing Control I, and I'm going to make some changes here where I'm going to make it easy just copying my sample prompt. What I'm doing now is asking like, hey, GitHub Copilot, can you help me adding a double field called base cost as well as an integer field called volume discount, and then also updating the product ID from integer to a string. Now here I would say, since it's only a minor change, it's adding some new fields, it's renaming like the type of the data from text or string to integer, or the other way around. You could go like, well, maybe you don't have to rely on GitHub Copilot to actually help you with that, but I just wanted to show you how easy it actually can become. And you're going to see, at least I hope, that the more you're going to start using it, it becomes so natural to start, I would say, forgetting about writing code changes yourself in a manual way, but really relying on Copilot to help you with that. Just gonna validate. I think it all looks quite accurate. It nicely added our double base cost. It added the integer type for volume discount, and it also updated product ID from integer back to a string. So once more, we're going to accept it, and assuming that everything is working fine. Moving on in our demo sequence here, one of the other steps in our creation of the quarterly sales report is updating the generate sales data method. So we need to, again, make some changes. What we're going to do here is updating the department name assignment, allocating from the randomly part of the name into the actual department name. So we're going to search for our generate sales data, Control F, generate sales data. There we go. We're going to select the code that we use for assigning the department name. Let's see where we have that. I think it's going to be this one. Control I, it's already recognizing the selection, and again using nothing more than our natural language. I'm asking Copilot, can you please help me updating the department name assignment to randomly select a department name using the prod department's data structure that we created before. And as you can see, it's immediately updating. And for now, once more, I'm just gonna accept it. We could continue, obviously, again, making more changes to the app. So after our department name here, let's add a few empty lines, and we're going to inject a few more code snippets. These are not coming from Copilot. Nicely injecting them, and then I'm going to select my index of the department, starting inline chat, Control I, and we're going to assign the index, and again, relying on our natural language approach, assign the array index for the department name using index of department. We're going to do the same for all the other fields and objects we have here, but you could also do like, well, thanks for helping, but I actually don't like it. So up till now, all my demos included accepting it.
which could actually give you maybe a little bit of the wrong impression, like, oh, anything that GitHub Copilot is suggesting looks to be 100% spot on. So it's always accepting, and done. But obviously, again, you're in control. It doesn't mean that you just have to accept everything that Copilot is suggesting. So easily discard, or you just close the chat using Control-I again. And that's actually clearing the code, but it didn't even make any real code updates. Another little change that we need to integrate in our app, but what we already allocated in the same way before, is now asking for an index of our department, assigning the department abbreviations, doing the same for our first string, selecting the line, Control-I, pasting it in. Gonna do the same for the other objects we have. So with that, we made a lot of changes, and just all based on the same concept. So using Control-I, updating the part of the code we already have, using natural language, describing what you want, like adding the index for the sizes, adding the color codes that we want to use, and all the other fields that we speeded up in the demo a little bit. But in the end, it was all based on the same concept. Starting from the code you have, running the updates using Control-I inline chat conversation with Copilot, and using your natural language to really update your code. And as I learned from the start of my demo, running the code updates and then validating .NET Run, and it actually still comes back with some nicely outcomes of our sales report. So this completes our second part of this demo in this module.
Now, as you know, we're about halfway in this timeline for this session, which means that we're almost done with the presentation. I already again threw in quite some demos, which means it's about time to stimulate your challenging brain a little bit. So again, I'm not going to read out all the details from the challenge, but in short, you're working in this sales reporting project. So if you're following along a little bit, remember we have that samples app repository with all the sample files that you need to go through a lot of the demos that I'm using. We're going to take it to the next level and challenging you a little bit. So in this example, you're using our quarterly sales sample project, where now the challenge is we want you to update the report to the top 3 sales orders, ordering by quarter, and then displaying the report information in just some text tables. We're simplifying it a bit. There's 2 tasks: updating the report format, presenting the department sales information as a table, and then in the second task, updating the report to list the top 3 sales orders for each quarter. So there's a lot of different descriptions here, how to get started, a little bit more details on task 1, task 2. So in task 1, updating the report format, again, has a couple of characteristics. We want you to format the department sales information. We have some descriptions here what that table should look like, adding the by department sales, including the header row, and then eventually creating the sample output. And then for the top 3 sales orders, it's basically almost the same. We want you to create an array of the sales data. You're going to use the top 3 sales orders, listing them, for example, by product ID, and then creating a descending profit, and still presenting it as a table, because that's what the console app is typically doing, and then eventually creating some sample output. So again, it's up to you to think about this challenge for a little bit. We don't really want you to go through this challenge as part of the training day because you probably need a little bit more time. But as you can imagine, I'm going to spoil the fun a little bit and showing you at least one little step how we get from the tasks into the challenge and successfully completing it.
So for this last one, although the 2 previous demos in this module were all about writing code, rewriting code if you want, adding a lot of intelligence thanks to GitHub Copilot into our already existing application syntax, is now showing something totally different, I would say, where we're going to start from a little Python application, technically doing the same thing, but using a different language. Because up till now, our sample code was based on the C#.NET framework using .NET 6, but that's just a demo app, right? Well, now I'm going to show you how powerful it actually is to translate from, in this case, Python into C# code. Again, it's a demo, but you can follow along using the GitHub sample app location out of that Microsoft Learning AZ2007 repo. If you missed that link, I would say maybe go back to one of our first modules in the course where we're guiding you through the starting point of the demo project. So in this case, I'm inside APL 2007 Module 3 Python. And if you're a little bit familiar with Python code, the way it's typically structuring is a source folder, a file in this case called main.py. There's some testing which we're not really going to use, a README file, and some requirements, all part of traditional Python application. So we still have about the same kind of information inside our application, because again, we're building a little app that's allowing us to pull up a console-based quarterly sales or income report. We have the definition of our parameters. We have all the different methods. We have the product departments, manufacturing sites. We define where to generate like the random sales data. We got some reporting and so on and so on. So from here, I would say personally, it's almost mind-blowing to me. What you need to do here is opening your Copilot chat, and how amazing is it that you only need to ask for convert selection, but there's only one file, the main.py, to the target language, which in our case could be C#. This is most probably one of the easiest prompts Azure. We're going to give it a little bit of time. Obviously, it needs to loop through like all the logic in the code, recognizing all the methods, recognizing all the objects. But as you can see here, it actually does a really powerful job and already creating that new application code for us.
Good. So again, it's not the goal to really take you by the hand and giving you all the answers to complete that challenge. But on the other side, there's a reason why we call it a challenge. It's not all that easy. So these are just 4 slides to give you some hints, some tips and tricks. And maybe, I hope that you are aware of this, that we're not trying to give you one single answer. Again, rely a little bit on the way you can interact with GitHub Copilot to come up with the solutions. That's, again, the whole objective of the challenge. Now, in short, for the first task, I could say you need to create that construct product ID method where you would probably use something like, hey, Copilot, inline or chat, that's up to you to decide. Can you create me that method? And then creating the constructor, using the product ID, formatting it with a specific syntax. Then in the second part, it's creating that deconstruct product ID method and extracting the product ID information from the previous source. And then returning that 2-dimensional string array. And then last, you're going to use the output, updating the quarterly sales report method that's responsible for providing the 3 most profitable products. So using the sorting, you could say. We're almost done, but there was a little bit more in task 1 that you had to go through, where you're going to create that new method. You're going to use the call statement for the construct product ID method, and then you're going to pass it on the current record of the sales data. And then in step 3, we have the construct product ID method, where you should get that string value output and using that as the input for the report. And then task 2, it's all about the deconstruct product ID. So you again rely on the chat conversation. I recommend to use that one. But again, you got quite some options to complete this. Creating that deconstruct product ID method, extracting the product ID, the department, the product serial number, the size code, color code, and anything that's important to reuse later on, creating that two-dimensional string. And then from there, you're going to create a dictionary because you got a whole bunch of values coming out of that. You're going to use that method to filter the product ID, and then you're going to create your quarterly report. Filtering it, sorting it per quarter, again, producing a dictionary, giving you the product serial numbers, and then in step number 4, you're going to create the baseline report displaying the 3 topmost profitable products, and then last, just playing a little bit with the formatting. All this is summarized here in 5 little steps, but nothing blocks you to use more steps. Again, the main goal is getting you into really using, almost playing, but I would say using GitHub Copilot, using inline, using chat. Hopefully there's a little bit of dynamic how you're going to use it and maybe mixing the 2 scenarios. If you come up with some error messages, rely on Copilot to help you explaining where that error message comes from. And again, getting it in your fingers on how to really do that. I'm going to close here with the last couple of steps showing you what it actually takes to complete this challenge. So for this reviewing code logic challenge, there's 3 different parts to complete. The first one is creating a construct product ID method. Next, creating a deconstruct product ID method. And then last, we once more gonna update our quarterly sales report with the updated information and finding the most profitable product. So 3 little tasks to go through where all of them will be done using GitHub Copilot chat. So the first part, I would say, is selecting our generate sales data method, and should be somewhere down here. There we go. So I'm selecting my generate sales data, where now we're going to rely on our chat conversation and running another prompt. So what I'm doing here is pointing to the hashtag selection, which means that, again, it doesn't need to look into the full details of the application, not even the full details of our application file, but just the selection I have in the code set. And from there, the prompt could be something like create a public static method with the given name and using the current index element pointing to already existing snippets of code in our application. So let's see what GitHub Copilot does with all this. So it's describing the plan, providing the snippet of code, and then summarizing the explanation, the reasoning why it came up with that code suggestion. So if we're happy with the outcome of this, I could use the copy or insert at cursor. So I'm just going to move my cursor at the end of my generate sales data block, running insert, and it's nicely moving all that code in my actual view. Looks pretty okay to me. Well, now we can move to the next step, and that's updating our sales data with the second one. Since it's a challenge, I'm going to skip this little part and then maybe moving over to the next one, where we're going to run another little prompt, create a new public static method named deconstruct product ID, and again using some of the information from before. And next to that, we're also providing 2-dimensional array containing descriptions, values, and everything that we asked for in the details of the challenge. And as you can figure out, it's producing once more a nice, complete little snippet of code. We would do the same thing here, inserting it as part of our reporting. And then last, for the updates in our quarterly sales report, you could use a prompt, and this is going to be a little bit longer. So the prompt that I would use for this one is update quarterly sales report method, providing the descriptions, pointing at the inner dictionary, using the deconstruct product ID that we created in the previous step, And next to that, again, just explaining in natural language, for each yearly quarter, build the inner dictionary, and so on, and so on, and so on. And again, this could be like copied from your software description, your application engineering description, what the functionality of the app actually needs to provide. Executing this again will update the code once more. Describing the plan, like this is how GitHub Copilot is going through your code. What are the different steps to maybe help you understanding what's going to happen once you fire off the code changes. And then all the way at the end, it's again producing an explanation for this. So once more, as always, I hope this gets you kickstarted in completing this part of the challenge in a successful way. Let's move back to the presentation. There's one last example here, close to the end of this session, where I would like to briefly talk about another challenge that you face as a developer, and that's converting code. Why? Because in the end, as a developer, you might need to pick up different languages. The way to need it is maybe because your organization is shifting platforms, maybe from on-prem to cloud, maybe from one cloud to another, where, depending a bit on the application stack, you are forced to move to a different language. Or another scenario, you might have some legacy code where you need to decide as a developer, how can we move forward? Are we moving from legacy code into the new version? Or again, why not moving from one application stack, one framework into a different language? Without GitHub Copilot, is it possible? Definitely. I mean, that's what organizations and developers have been doing for so long. But again, we're talking about accelerating your job as a developer thanks to GitHub Copilot capabilities. And that's exactly what this one is about. So I got only one short demo here where I'm going to show you how easy it is to switch from one developing programming language to another. And next to that, even converting an entire code file. So really optimizing the migration from one code into another. This is going to be a really short demo, but nevertheless really impressive if you ask me. What I have here is some Python code. We talked about our quarterly income reports, our sales statistics, C#.NET application that we're building, where now maybe one of our colleagues or maybe the old version of the app was not written in C#, but in this case it's using Python. Technically, it's doing the exact same thing as what the app was doing before. We have our quarterly income. We have the different objects that you find over here. We have the different product departments. We got the manufacturing sites. And then a little bit further down, we're asking to come up with our report in the console. This is my existing Python code, where now I can do Control-A, selecting all the code that I have. I go back to my chat. I started a new chat session, and this is really mind-blowing. We can now do a basic prompt, convert selection, although there's only one file, so don't really have to add selection, to C#. That's it. Convert selection to C#. I'm going to move this out of the way, and what it's doing here again, if you ask me, is totally mind-blowing. It's recognizing all the Python code. It's recognizing all the different methods that we have, including the prints and everything, and it's nicely translating this to full end-to-end C# code. Depending on the complexity of your app, this might take a little bit longer. If you have multiple Python files, not just one file, you need to go through this process for all files that you have as a source, but it's nicely coming up with pretty impressive code. I could select all this code if I accept it. Obviously, it's not really going to do anything because it's like a Python application, right? So the next step from here would be going all the way to the top and copying the code. From there, as you already know from previous demos, we could do add workspace, create me a new console application, a new console application in C#, .NET 8, create the CS and CS project file. Although I'm still in my Python environment, it's now creating a new workspace. It's going to recognize the template I'm asking for. It's coming up with the baseline template building blocks. It creates a new file. My CS project is there. My program CS is there. I'm going to create my workspace. I'm going to add it back into my sample apps folder. So this is going to be APL 2007 M3 number 3. It's creating all the necessary files. I'm going to open my workspace inside my program CS. I'm going to paste in my sample code. And that's basically all the steps that I need to do. So what we did here is starting from existing live running Python code, using one single prompt, convert to C#. I don't even have to specify anything else. And then a little bit of a repeat from a previous one, like create me a new application using the prompt as the starting point. And then from here, I could run this application. It's going to show me the quarterly results, identical to what we already did in a previous demo. With that, I'm going back to the presentation and closing out with the last part of the session. Now, before closing out, let me remind you about a few best practices. Well, first of all, the demo worked. I mean, it's a demo, we try, we prep, and it's magically working. But does this mean that you can go out to your development team and telling like, oh my God, I found a magic solution. GitHub Copilot is going to help me migrating from legacy code into brand new, totally different framework. Well, maybe not at all. So that's where I would like to finish this session with a few best practices. So we talked about prompts. You use them specifically if you manage to go through the challenge. That's where you're really going to use that prompting mechanism, going back and forth, using inline, using chat, and anything in between. Once more, start general. From there, try to make it as more specific as possible. Nothing wrong with giving examples, like, hey, this is a snippet of code that I used in another application that's doing about the same. Can you use this as an example to help me creating the next method, creating a class, creating a constructor, and anything else? Breaking up a complex task into a series of smaller tasks. Because again, the more specific you can go, typically the more accurate your suggestions will be as well. Avoid ambiguity, which means that what the example I shared before, try to focus on the project you're working on. You can open up any application project in your Visual Studio VS Code environment, but that might confuse your tooling. Try to focus to the core concepts, maybe opening up one or two sample files, pointing back, going back and forth, and then just the interactivity, the way you're going to use the GitHub Copilot tooling, just try to make it as natural as possible. You're going to jump from the code completion into documentation, into explaining what we touched on in the previous session, and then switching back and forth. Try to optimize, accelerate the way you interact with a tool using the slash comments like /explain, /doc, and so forth and so forth. And then just try to use again as a natural assistant. Experiment with it a little bit, maybe create a little small sample project. And if you're happy with the outcome, then just use that from that moment on to become that GitHub Copilot assistant for anything that you're developing. That's the main thing. So with that, we're at the end of this session 3. It's the end of part 1 as well. Now, before closing part 1, let me ramp up what we just talked about in this last session. It was all about writing code, using GitHub Copilot to help you creating code, accelerating your development work, where we talked about the workspace, we talked about files, we talked about projects, helping you explaining code, helping you creating documentation, and then eventually helping you actually writing code using inline features and also using the chat on the side. So with that, we're at the end of our part 1. I hope you enjoyed. Most of all, I hope you learned quite a lot about GitHub Copilot. Fantastic tooling helping you accelerating as a developer. But even more important, I would like to invite you for part 2, where we're going to talk about unit testing and a few other more advanced coding generation options. Thank you for now, and see you again in part 2.